alleviated one very pressing problem for much of the morning.
Yes, but we still see that it's burning. We see that it continues to burn, and you can do some search and rescue around the periphery of what's burning, but to actually get into the area that's burning, this is going to be a long-term process.
John?
Now, you mentioned something about continuity of government contingency plans. What are we seeing in New York and in Washington where the officials are not, where we're accustomed to seeing them, not in the White House, not operating out of City Hall? Have they gone to ground?
You have to in a situation like this, when you view that the country has been attacked. You have to have alternative sites for the mayor, for the governor to operate from, to continue government.
On the assumption that their regular sites are potential targets?
Oh, sure. You have to do that. And I would imagine that's what's happening in Washington as well.
Good afternoon. This is Maureen Bunyan in the ABC 7 newsroom. You are looking at a live picture of the Pentagon, which is still on fire. There apparently is smoke coming out. Obviously is smoke coming out. We assume it is still on fire, with officials trying to get that blaze contained since this morning's terrorist attack on the building.
It has now been 5 hours since that terrorist attack, since a plane slammed into the Pentagon. This was the scene at approximately 10 o'clock this morning when that plane struck the Pentagon. It penetrated the outer wall and then made its way into the inner corridor at the Pentagon. As you might imagine, at that moment, all people were told to evacuate the Pentagon, which they did. The rescue efforts have been underway now since then. We have some video now of the people that are being evacuated, both medically and otherwise. We are not receiving detailed information at this point as to just what the full numbers are, just what the full damage was. We know that the Pentagon itself staffs 20,000 people. No idea at this point just how many people may have been inside at the time.
And Del, here's the situation in the skies over the United States at this moment. The Federal Aviation FAA says that all of commercial aircraft flights have now reached their destinations. No additional takeoffs are being allowed in the aftermath of today's attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And the FAA also says that no troubles have been reported with any more flights across the United States.
And obviously there are those in our area that are trying to get information about loved ones who may have been on those flights. The American Airlines information number is there on your screen. It is 1-800-245-0999. And also it is believed that 2 of the flights may have been United Airlines flights. 1-800-932-8555 is the number you can call for United Airlines information, and we will keep putting those up for you throughout the afternoon.
And also here in the district has been declared a state of emergency. The mayor made that declaration earlier this afternoon at a press conference. Here's some of what he had to say then.
Again, we're declaring a state of emergency in order to put everyone on alert, in order to ensure that we have the highest level of preparedness. Obviously, if something were to happen, God forbid, and we pray that it won't, we will be fully prepared to then execute the necessary contingency plans.
And the mayor says he will have further news conferences this afternoon at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock to bring us up to date on the situation in the district.
We also need to update you right now to the extent of the state of emergency in the district as to what you can and you can't do. There are several road closings that we need to tell you about. Route 50, 66, 29, and the GW Parkway are all closed inbound from Virginia. They are open only for medical personnel. Once again, inbound into the district. Routes 50, 66, 29, and the GW Parkway are all closed inbound. Route 1 is also closed outbound from D.C., and Route 395 northbound, we are told, which is outbound, is also closed.
And Del, some more traffic information for you folks. VRE says it now has very limited service this afternoon. MARC train service remains suspended. It is running buses at some of the stations, but and the buses are not on any schedule, but the train service is suspended.
And we want to reiterate that this has been a two-pronged terrorist attack. Of course, the worse and more severe attack happening in New York City, and then there is the attack on the Pentagon itself. We are coordinating our efforts with ABC News to bring you the most information that we possibly can. We're going to return to ABC News and Peter Jennings right now.
Of the White House. John McCarthy, who covers the Pentagon, national security, and a good deal of terrorism and international intelligence issues for us, is at the Pentagon. John, what have you got?
A whole plate full of things, Peter. First of all, we've been talking throughout the day about possible ship movements, American ship movements. It is true that 2 aircraft carriers, 5 other combatants, and a hospital ship are now all heading north along the Atlantic seaboard toward New York. No decision has yet been made about exactly what to do with those ships when they get there, but of course aircraft carriers have a very large hospital capability, so they could be used for that. I think it is a responsive measure. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, after the attack on the Pentagon, went immediately to the gash that you see behind me here when the very first destruction was detected and helped pull some people out of the rubble. He is now in what is called the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, and he intends to stay there indefinitely until all forces around the world have been secured. All forces around the globe at this point are at ThreatCon Delta, which is the highest level of threat condition that American troops can be in. One of the difficulties with the fire and the rescue effort here in the Pentagon, Peter, is we have seen continuous outbreaks of fires within the different levels of the Pentagon, and it has been extremely difficult for search and rescue people to get inside the Pentagon. It was 5 hours before the first people were able to get into some of the rubble to try to begin to pull out people who may have been trapped. The fire in the Pentagon was described as an inferno by those people who were in some of the worst areas. The evacuation in parts of the Pentagon was very orderly. Some of it was complete chaos, as you might expect.
Okay, John, thanks very much. John McCarthy at the Pentagon. We just take a quick look at John there. Jackie, you there for a second? I want to put John on camera for a second because earlier today you described, you just turn around and take a look at that gash in the Pentagon there and describe again for us. You think it's what, 200 feet wide, 200 to 300 feet wide?
It is at least 200 or 300 feet wide, Peter. Just imagine a very large commercial aircraft ramming into this space. The Pentagon is built like a blockhouse, as you know, during World War II. It is a very substantial building, and this aircraft, traveling at between 150 and 200 miles an hour, penetrated deeply into the rings of the Pentagon, almost to the center. The destruction on the 5 floors that are above ground is considerable. One of the admirals was briefing us earlier that he felt that the section that was hit was one of the areas that was being repaired. We now believe that is not true. It is an area that was very fully staffed, primarily with Navy and Marine Corps personnel, but also the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Okay, thanks very much, John McCarthy at the Pentagon. We'll come back to you. On the phone with us at the moment is the former CIA Director, James Woolsey. Mr. Woolsey, there's so much to ask you about at a moment like this in terms of your experience, but as our political director, or actually that's not true, as a former senior White House official said a short while ago to one of us, there's going to be a hellacious amount of finger-pointing at the moment. What's gone wrong here?
Well, one thing that's gone wrong, Peter, I think, is that for some years now, we have adopted a theory that terrorism first was likely just to be sort of a pickup team, these loose associations of terrorists inspired, say, by the Blind Sheikh in New York. This was the thought in the 2 bombings, one attempted, one real in New York back in the early 90s. And then the Clinton administration veered off into saying everything looked like it might be Osama bin Laden. It's important that we realize there is a real possibility when you have something this devastating and well-coordinated that there could be state action of some sort behind it. Now, I don't know that that's the case, and I won't say that it's the case, but there is at least a plausible case that there was Iraqi government involvement in the World Trade Center bombing back in 1993. This all has to do with the identity, the true identity of Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind who's in prison out in Colorado now. At his sentencing, the judge said, we still don't really know who you are. And if there was a chance that there was Iraqi government involvement in that, since Youssef was the mastermind of the World Trade Center and of a bombing plot in the Pacific, which he was working on when he was caught to have a lot of American airlines in the Pacific blown up. What happened today is a sort of amalgam of the earlier two Ramzi-Yousef plots. It's at least, I think, interesting that that's the case, and if some of the observers, Laurie Milroy and others, are correct, that there's a reasonable chance that he was, in fact, involved with the Iraqi government. There could also be a chance that the Iraqi government is involved here, even if bin Laden or other terrorist groups are as well.
Can I just ask you just a couple of really elementary questions about intelligence? You've just done something on the air which strikes me as what intelligence officers do when they sit down to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Is that in fact, what you're trying to do at the moment? You called it an amalgam of two plots. Is that how it works at the moment?
Well, this is nothing but circumstantial evidence that I've been talking about, but it's interesting circumstantial information anyway. And yes, that's the sort of thing that I think intelligence officers need to do. Part of the problem with the World Trade Center bombing back in '93 is that most of the information about it was under grand jury secrecy until the trial, and after that, not many people paid attention to it. So even most of the federal government had no access to it, except outside the FBI and parts of justice.
Now, you mentioned governments and individual organizations or operations. Don't governments traditionally leak information more than independent or semi-independent terrorist cells? If there were a government involved, is it not inconceivable that the United States didn't pick up something?
I think it's possible that a government could be involved and not be picked up, especially if it was operating very carefully, as the Iraqis or conceivably the Iranians might under these circumstances. It is normally somewhat easier to learn what's going on inside a government than a terrorist group, particularly one that doesn't use many communications and the like, and does everything within just a very small number of people. But it's not impossible that terrorist groups could work together with a government. The Iraqi government has been quite closely involved with a number of the Sunni terrorist groups, and on some matters has had contact with bin Laden. So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Woolsey, I think I just lost you.
I said on some matters.
Lost at the moment, and I hope we'll get him back on the telephone. The former director of the CIA, James Woolsey, on the phone, agreeing that there's going to be a heck of a lot of finger-pointing at the FBI, at the Department of Defense, and at the CIA. No, I have my FP. Thank you very much. I just lost the director of the CIA. Okay, thank you very much. Because, as this former official in the White House points out, people are going to demand massive retaliation. Mr. Woolsey raises two quite fascinating possibilities. One, that there is a terrorist organization or group involved with a government, that there is, as there has been believed in the past, a terrorist operation within the Iranian political establishment, which perhaps even other parts of the Iranian political establishment didn't know about, and similarly true, though much likely, for them to be operating in ignorance of Saddam Hussein inside Iraq as well. But the reason that, and I bring John Miller back briefly in on this again, the reason he suggests an amalgam, Mr. Woolsey does, of two footprints is because of the potential, never perfectly proved, that Ramzi-Yousef, who has been on trial and convicted of the first trade tower attack, did seem to have some tenuous connection with Iraq.
And that this is a mixture of the two plots that were his two big capers. One, the plot to blow up numerous airlines on the Pacific route, targeting American tourists. The other to blow up the World Trade Center. Here, planes, American carriers have been used to attack the World Trade Center.
Okay, I apologize.
No, as Mr. Woolsey pointed out, the difficulty with Ramzi-Yousef and really getting to the bottom of the World Trade Center was, while he escaped as the mastermind and while he was captured in a guest house funded by bin Laden, nobody ever knew who sent him in the first place, or what his real nationality was, or even what his real name was, which set him apart from all the other people connected with those cases. Truly a mystery man, still in prison here in America.
As somebody said a little while ago, too, in terms of everything we're looking at now, suspects, there's no good options on the table in this regard whatsoever. Let's try to keep up with the running developments of the day. Lisa Stark is with us from Seattle. She covers aviation for us. And Lisa, when we last commented on the status of this plane, we have at least one I beg your pardon, at least 2 of them in the process of being hijacked.
Right, Peter. Here's the latest information we know right now. We know, obviously, the 2 American planes were lost. Flight 11 from Boston to L.A. That is one of the planes that went into the World Trade Tower. Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles. We believe that that may have been the plane that went into the Pentagon. The 2 United planes, United 93, that is the plane that crashed south of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And now United 175, that plane, the plane from Boston to Los Angeles, a government source has confirmed that that was the second plane that went into one of the World Trade Towers in New York. I'm also being told by government sources, and again, these things change throughout the day, Peter, I want to caution people, but this is what we know now. A government source tells me that on American Airlines Flight 11, again, that was the flight from Boston to Los Angeles that went into the Trade Tower, that a flight attendant on that plane was apparently able to call the American Airlines Operations Center to tell them that 2 flight attendants had been stabbed and that the perpetrators had broken into the flight deck. We've also been told that a passenger aboard one of the United flights, United Flight 93, the one that crashed in Pennsylvania, a passenger on that flight was able to call 911 apparently and let them know that the plane was being hijacked. Again, this information from government sources, and we don't know if it will hold up throughout the day, but that's what we are being told at this time.
I very much appreciate you bringing us up to date. There's one thing that I'm never quite clear on yet, and that may be just because where I'm sitting. Do we know American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was a 767, is that correct?
Yes.
United Airlines 175, which went into the World Trade Center.
That was a 767
as well. The American aircraft plane, which we're a little uncertain about the crashing into the Pentagon, was it Boeing 757?
Correct.
And it was also a 757 that crashed near Johnstown.
Exactly.
So we have 2 very popular and very widely used and very important aircraft in these 2 airlines being used. Lisa, thanks very much indeed. On the phone from Washington with us now is the former Secretary of State, James Baker. Are you there, Mr. Baker?
I'm here, Peter.
So what would you do?
Well, it's a pretty tough one, Peter. It's everybody, of course, is in deep sorrow and shock. It seems to me that this is something we've been worried about for a long time. We've been able, fortunately, to foreclose it up to now. We may be entering a bit of a new era. We may have to do a bit more to preempt these types of events. We may need to get some better human intelligence to penetrate some of these groups before acts like this can be carried out. We may need to do even more to beef up. Obviously, I suppose we need to do even more to beef up our airport security. There's a lot along those lines, I think, that needs to be done, and mostly, I think, strengthen our intelligence capabilities.
You are the second second senior former government official to say to us today, to imply very clearly that human intelligence in those areas of the world which are to some extent breeding grounds of terrorism are plainly weak.
Well, they are weak, Peter. We went on a real witch hunt with our CIA back in the early mid-'70s. We had hearings. I won't mention the name of the legislator who conducted those hearings, but they, in effect, resulted in our eliminating a lot of our human intelligence capabilities. It's a dirty business. When you have human intelligence, you're doing business with the kinds of people that will commit these acts. Sometimes the first test of a human intelligence agent, the first test they send them out on is to go out and kill somebody. So it's pretty tough for America to get into that, and we got out of it. But it may be that we have to get into that kind of business.
Mr. Secretary, why don't you just name the legislator, because you're just going to cause more trouble for me to go to the file and look it up. Who held these hearings, and what's the point you're trying to make?
Well, they were the Church Committee hearings, and what I think we did as a consequence of those hearings was to, in effect, unilaterally disarm in terms of our intelligence capabilities. Now, we have the best, technological intelligence gathering operations and capabilities in the world, but we need this human intelligence to penetrate groups like the group that must have carried out these operations.
I have only a vague recollection of this, but I think the point you're making is that there are some forces, political and otherwise, in the United States, who believe that getting down and dirty with potential terrorists around the world is not something we should be doing, that we should do it all technically, therefore not put people at risk?
That's correct. That was the thinking, and that's pretty much the policy we followed since then. And I think we need to get back into the down and dirty business so we can penetrate these groups and hopefully prevent these types of things from happening in the future.
Mr. Baker, I don't want to get ahead of things, and I'm sure you do not either. But if there is, and as somebody said earlier, there are no good options out there at the moment. But do you believe that the United States is, if it finds out that a state is involved, going to have to go to war in an active way against that state?
Well, first of all, I don't believe we're going to find out that a state is involved. I cannot really, frankly, conceive of a state doing this. There could be, I suppose, some indirect assistance from a state or groups within a state, and I don't think that's going to be the case. But if it were the case, I think we need to do whatever we reasonably and responsibly can to protect the American people, whatever that involves.
Now, this is always the toughest question for somebody who has been in office but is not currently. How much easier is it to say what you do now that you're not in government? In other words, were you the Secretary of State in the Bush administration at the moment? Now, would you not feel rather constrained by modern circumstances as to what you could do?
Well, I don't know. I mean, frankly, Peter, we have some laws on our books that we ought to take a look at. One of them is simply a presidential executive order that says the United States doesn't go out and assassinate people. I think there was a very good reason behind that, but I dare say that you would have about 99%, if not 100% public support across the United States today if we found out that one terrorist group was responsible for these incidents. You would have 100% support almost for taking care of the person who leads that group.
One of the difficulties, of course, Mr. Baker, is that in a situation like this, we end up fighting like the terrorists to some extent, right?
Well, that is unfortunately the case. That's true, but it may be that that's the only way we can really take care of the problem. You know, the president said today, he made a statement I think was absolutely the right statement. He said America is under attack, under terrorist attack, and he said we are going to hunt down and punish those we find responsible for this. And that, to my way of thinking, means doing whatever is required.
Mr. Baker, thanks very much for the time.
Thank you.
James Baker, the former Secretary of State, also widely known in the country as the man who did as much as he did to win Florida for George Bush at the last presidential election, but a longtime member of the American political and foreign policy establishment, and who knows how complicated this is, and who makes a very open, you'll hear this a lot in the next few days, not enough human intelligence, and we'll review who that legislator was. Tony Cordesman, our military analyst. Are you listening to Mr. Baker? Is he making sense?
He is, Peter, but I think we need to have an important caution here. Human intelligence isn't as simple as it sounds. The actual agents can take years to develop. Historically, they've often been unreliable, and the more hostile the ideology is, the more uncertain the collection. Human intelligence is also analysis. Our analytic side is weak. The CIA has had hiring freezes. There is so little money for CIA and for DIA that most of the country analysts have never been to the countries they're actually analyzing, much less talked to many of the elements within them. And as Secretary Baker pointed out, if you're going to go into operations, that's different from human intelligence, and our operations capability has been allowed to decline for nearly a decade.
Thank you, Tony. The game has changed a good deal today, so let us get back. Yes, John.
Before Jerry Hauer leaves us, and he's promised to come back, all of the discussions we've had raised the question to me, and I know Jerry's been more fully briefed on these national security agencies matters than any of us have. How many of these attacks have we known about and been able to prevent? How many that we've heard about? How many that we haven't heard about? And have any of them been on this scale?
That's difficult to answer, John, because a lot of that material is classified. A lot of that is kept classified, but there clearly are a number of threats that occur in this country almost on a daily basis. Some of them are hoaxes. Some of them are credible. Some of them are quite credible. And the spectrum varies. And They've had, and some we've been very fortunate with, as we were right before the millennium with the
intrusion from Canada.
Yeah,
but that was one that was the work of an alert agent. How many have we actually prevented through intelligence, which is kind of what Mr. Woolsey and Mr. Baker have been talking about?
I'm not sure anybody has a good number on that. That's something that I think that would be difficult to put your finger on at this point. You know, and I'd be interesting to get that from the FBI. I'm not sure that I've ever heard a number on how many we've actually thwarted.
Have you ever picked up the phone in your emergency management center and had someone on the other end who said we're going to blow up something?
We actually did receive a number of threats.
What was it like?
We had some letters come in, and we turned them over to the FBI. By and large, we felt that the majority of them were hoaxes, but we relied on the FBI for their intelligence, for their analysis of threats. We relied on the police department intelligence division. And by and large, with the exception of one or two that were a little more credible than others, most of them were pretty lame hoaxes.
I remember two of those that were quite serious. In 94 and 95, when I was with the police department, we received information from the FBI that there was going to be a truck bomb attack within 48 hours on the New York Stock Exchange. We responded by surrounding it literally with sanitation sand trucks and blocking the street, and eventually set up a cordon which has still not come down. The other was a planned attack on the Israeli mission to the United Nations, which has been surrounded by cement blocks, first the sand trucks, and ever since again.
Our thanks to Jerry Hauer, the former head of the New York Mayor's Office of Emergency Management and Operations, and as we said at the beginning, it's an office which is not operating in the place that Jerry Hauer set it up, which was right adjacent to the World Trade Center, and it has been blocked off, put out of commission in one way or another by the horrendous devastation which has occurred in that part of town today. And we don't want to lose sight of it for a second in all this discussion about intelligence and terrorism. So I want to go back to George Stephanopoulos who's closer to the building than anybody else, and then Bill Blakemore. They are both watching the search and rescue operations, and both report now. George?
Well, Peter, we still don't know that it is a search and rescue operation yet. Just a little while ago, one of the volunteers who tried to go down there and help reported back and said when you actually got to the scene, and you see it behind me, that cloud of black smoke, when you actually got to the scene at the World Trade Center, what was most remarkable, what was most amazing, what was most horrifying is that basically nothing was happening. They couldn't go into the building and actually perform any real rescue operations. And he also described the scene very close to the World Trade Center, soot and silt up to his waist. He said it was hell. We have also talked to some firefighters who've gotten fairly close to the scene. They've now set up a special command center over here at Manhattan Borough Community College here on the west side where they're relieving each other. One fireman said that he was buried underneath all the dirt and debris, had to dig himself out, but still didn't know what had happened to his 6 partners who had gone into the building and near the building.
George, can I just interrupt you for a sec? I'll come right back to you. But Ann Compton, who's been with the president all day, is on the phone from Nebraska, and we don't want to lose her if we can have her. Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I can.
What are you doing in Nebraska?
Well, we didn't know where we were till we landed. President Bush is here at the home of the Strategic Command. This is the area, this is the base where those big doomsday aircraft are kept. And he has disappeared down the rabbit hole, Peter, down through a red brick small building. He and what skeleton staff are with him down into an underground bunker where Ari Fleischer tells me the president is going to chair a National Security Council meeting by teleconference. We're also told that the president has been on the phone several times with the vice president, who is able to work out of a command center at the White House itself in one of the secure areas below in the White House.
Annie, your description of the president going down the rabbit hole, going into a very secure compound bunker in Nebraska at Offutt Air Force Base suggests that people in his entourage believe there has been a threat today, or a potential threat to the highest political leadership in the country. Is that correct?
Well, and I asked exactly that question. They say there was no hint of any warning of the attacks that came on the East Coast today. But as you know, they always take the precaution, especially once the Pentagon was hit, that the president might be a target as well. And that is why he has come to as secure a place as he could, where he is trying to marshal the forces. He's also talking to some of the civilian leaders on the ground, including Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki. But we were told there was no direct threat to him and no advance warning, and that in itself, Peter, is distressing to the very small number of staff of the president here at Offutt.
So the procedures are in place, and they do what they do, right?
Well, you know, in 27 years of covering presidents and crises, we have never played the kind of hunted game that was played today, where we would take off in the plane and not know where we were going to land, and then once we landed in Louisiana, where we were literally told not to use cell phones so our location couldn't be pinpointed, to take off again and head to the center. It does feel like a cat and mouse game. Ari Fleischer, when I asked him if the president feels in jeopardy or hunted, he said the president understands that this is kind of the precaution that is necessary at a time like this, and that he's anxious to get back to Washington.
And for example, when you phoned us just a moment ago, thank goodness you did you have to ask permission to do it?
No, because it is hard to hide a great big airplane like Air Force One. And when we were coming in, I could tell we were over a flat area, a fairly urban area. And I guessed it was Nebraska, knowing that we hadn't been that far out of Louisiana. And indeed, as we came down over the field, I saw a TV satellite truck out on the highway. And sure enough, on our screens inside the plane, we watched ourselves land. The local media was already here, figuring this is where the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief would land.
Because it's part of the old Strategic Air Defense Command.
Exactly right. It has the facilities, the secure facilities here, where the President can still be, as what Ari tells me is...
I'm Del Walters, reporting live from the ABC 7 News studios, where we continue to cut in on every half hour to bring you up to date on the situation unfolding at the Pentagon. We now know a little bit more about the fire. ABC News is reporting that it is literally an inferno inside, and also the District of Columbia Fire Department, we understand, has now sent the equivalent of 3 alarms worth of personnel and equipment to help Arlington and Pentagon firefighters just deal with the fire after the plane crashed into it this morning.
Joining Del, I'm Kathleen Matthews, and we're also getting confirmation now that the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was actually the flight that took off from Dulles Airport earlier this morning. Now, it's been 5.5 hours since the plane crashed into the Pentagon. As you can see, a scene of tremendous building carnage there. Associated Press is now quoting anonymous law enforcement officials that say the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77. It had taken off from Dulles Airport and was bound for Los Angeles. That airline was carrying 58 people, 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. ABC 7 News reporter Daryl Carver is live at the Pentagon right now and brings us up to date on everything that's been going on there this morning. Daryl?
Kathleen, I want to set the scene for you for just a little bit. If we can take a look at the Pentagon right now, the fire here is still burning at this hour. We have been told that members of the Fairfax County Urban Rescue Team, that elite rescue team, is awaiting entry, but however, they are still waiting for the fire to be put out. We've been told it is a scene of tremendous carnage inside of there. Most of the damage at this point, from what we understand, is in the E-ring, or the outer ring of the Pentagon. As you can see, there are still fire crews being rushed in there. There are still emergency workers all throughout this scene. We're still trying to get a few more details on what the situation is at this point inside. And when we get those details, we will pass them on to you. For now, reporting live from the Pentagon, Daryl Carver, ABC 7 News. Back to you.
Daryl, thank you very much. We want to update you on the injuries and also some more information with regards to the Pentagon plane crash. We now understand that it did not hit a portion of the Pentagon that may have been under construction, and indeed there were people. It was heavily occupied at the time. Now let's take a look at some of the injuries reports that we are receiving. Virginia Hospital Center is reporting at this hour that they have received 30 injured parties. Washington Hospital Center says that they have received 5 people in critical condition. George Washington Hospital says that they have received 2 people, both of whom are in the emergency room. And Alexandria Anova Hospital, this is information that we just received, says it is treating 11 people. 9 people all told, or 9 people are in fair condition. 1 is in critical condition, and 1 person is in good condition.
We will continue to cut into ABC News to bring you the very latest on the local situation. We'll be back again at 4 o'clock. Meanwhile, we join ABC News in progress.
Some small indications and that the broader evacuation of the senior staff of the White House that is always planned for in emergencies, as you hinted at, from a relic from the Cold War days, has also gone into effect. I spoke with the spouse of the senior White House.
George, I apologize. I'm only interrupting you because you're so... Okay, you don't have those sirens behind you. Go ahead.
The sirens behind me, sorry. I spoke earlier, just a little while ago, to the spouse of a senior White House official who received a call simply from the Secret Service saying, your spouse is safe, is in a secure location right now. I remember from my early days, Peter, in the White House, several senior White House staff are given cards and have evacuation plans for places to go in cases of national emergency. And as I said, there does seem to be some indication that that may have been put into effect. I would just add one more note. Ann was talking about the possibility of the president doing now a teleconference with his senior national security officials. There are facilities in the White House, not the normal situation room, which everyone has seen in the past, has seen pictures of, but there is a second situation room behind the primary situation room, which has video conferencing capabilities. The director of the Pentagon, the defense chief can speak from the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. The Secretary of State can speak from the State Department, the president from wherever he is, and they'll have this capability to video conference throughout this crisis. In my time at the White House, it was used in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing, in the aftermath of the TWA Flight 800 bombing, and that would be the way they would stay in contact through the afternoon.
Just a couple of short questions. Given where the president has gone from Florida to Louisiana to Nebraska, and given that we hear from the political staff that they'd like him to come back to Washington, does the president have any say at the moment, basically, if the Secret Service says go left or go right or go here or go there?
Well, the president has the ability to overrule them if he wants, but I think in this situation, Peter, he would follow their directions, obviously pushing them to try to get back as soon as he could, if that was really what his political advisors wanted. But he would take their direction on this one. Sometimes you can fight the Secret Service on, how long you're going to spend in a rope line. I don't think you'd do it on this.
Okie dokie. And the other question is, in terms of Dick Cheney, the vice president, is in the White House now. Just from a purely operational point of view, if you were trying to run things at the moment, would you like to be in the White House or in a bunker in Nebraska? Or would it make any difference?
Well, it doesn't. I think right now, Peter, it doesn't make any difference. Air Force One and this bunker in Nebraska has complete communications all across the board. And as I said, my guess is that Vice President Cheney is in that second situation room. A camera is trained on him. He can see the president can see him. They can see Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary of State Powell. It's as if they're meeting in one room.
Now tell me, let's return to the immediate business at hand. Every time I check in with you, or we check in with you, I hear sirens virtually right underneath you. What's going on right underneath you?
Well, right underneath, I'm at Canal Street and the Avenue of Americas, which is about 20 blocks away from the World Trade Center there. Every once in a while, right outside my window right now, there are about 4 police vans and a police car. But the police seem to just be stationing there, almost resting right now. The area right around us is quite quiet. About an hour ago, 2 hours ago, there were hordes of people walking uptown. That's pretty much stopped. Now, Peter, I got to tell you, it's very strange. You look down on the sidewalk, and you just have people strolling in their summer clothes up in this neighborhood right here. But again, from what we've heard of that situation down by the World Trade Center, it's horrific. It's kind of eerily silent. The firemen are relieving each other every 15 minutes or so. They come out, they get showered down with fire hoses to get all the soot off, and then they go right back in and get to work.
And just remind me one more time, George, the layman's notion of a bunker is one thing out in Nebraska, and I assume the White House has another notion of bunker. What does it mean down the rabbit hole into the bunker?
Well, in the bunker would just be certainly underground, a secure situation room, but the important point, Peter, is that wherever that bunker is, and it's reinforced by guards and concrete and all that, the president is in full communication with his entire national security team, and he can direct them at a moment's notice. And I think the big question that they're going to have to address now as they gather the facts, as they try and figure out who's responsible for this, even though they want to get the president back to Washington as soon as possible, and I'm sure they'll do that, they won't want him to go before the country again until he has more to say, and probably until he can say what actions he's going to take in response to this.
Okay, thanks, George Stephanopoulos, who, as he pointed out, was somewhat isolated from the violence there, because as close as they'll let you broadcast at this point, but you can still see the smoke coming up. It's felt all over the country. A number of newspapers around the country are now putting out special editions of the day. I remember when the Challenger exploded, we were on television for many, many, many hours, and which does, to some extent, isolate you from what is happening. You become a conveyor belt for information. Going back to the hotel and realizing that the New York Times and the Washington Post had then put out 30-some-odd page editions in terms of the Challenger disaster, John, and it just reminds you that you can be isolated from something that is so overwhelming. And George Stephanopoulos acknowledges he is not as close to the violence and tragedy. Like ABC's Bill Blakemore is somewhat closer. Bill, can you hear me? Bill Blakemore? Okay, we'll come back to Bill Blakemore. But Bill Blakemore has, you know, we want to be as close as we can and not get in anybody's way. And I was pointing out that newspapers across the country publishing these special editions. There's not been a special edition of this magnitude probably since the Challenger disaster. Before that, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, or in some cases, newspapers are putting out the first major special edition they've done since John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Many of the papers will clearly use terror in their banner headlines. Certainly the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel was one that did that with a subheading saying, "Attacks Rip Trade Center, Pentagon, America's Soul." And I think a great many people in the country feel that is precisely what has happened today, that the trade towers, as we've said many times, these absolute symbols of the United States in so many ways, right there on the edge of Manhattan, first city in the New World, the great advertisement to the rest of the world of commerce and success and upward mobility and all that stuff, and those two trade towers are simply no longer there. And then the attack on the Pentagon at the very heart of the establishment, the military government establishment today, and the deep psychological damage that this, or wound, if not long-term damage, this is going to do to the country. And then we learned just a short while ago that United Airlines jet that was carrying 45 people, which crashed near Johnstown in Pennsylvania today, was, at least according to one congressman, James Moran, Democrat from Virginia, who had a Marine Corps briefing in Washington. He believes that that aircraft was originally intending by its hijackers to go to Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland, and the crash site actually turns out to be about 85 miles northwest of Camp David. So no one should be surprised, perhaps no one is, at the ripple effect at every level of government, not to mention in everybody's soul today, from this initial attack on the trade towers. One of our reporters, Ellen Davis, reports, by the way, from the American Red Cross in New York City. They've actually had so many volunteers for blood that about 1,200 people showed up at the blood donation center in New York City, and they actually have enough blood for now, except for people with type O and Rh negative blood, because they have a shortage of those. But in terms of all other types of blood, they seem to be in pretty good shape. John Miller, what are you finding on the telephone?
Basically, still that they are just beginning to try and mount a rescue operation in the Trade Center, that they are still trying to assess how many people are trapped inside, that they're still trying to collate the number of people that they removed to so many different hospitals in 2 states. And now, because our burn centers here in New York, of which there are only 3, have been overwhelmed even in Canada. So they're really just beginning what's going to be an operation that's going to take not days, but weeks, more likely months.
Let's go, thank you, John. Let's go to ABC's Bill Blakemore, who I said is in lower Manhattan and closer even than George Stephanopoulos was able to get. Bill, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Go ahead.
There's an enormous search and rescue operation being mounted here for what's clearly going to be many days of grim work. We're just north of the wreckage and the smoke still coming out on the West Side Highway, right next to the Hudson River. Hundreds of firemen are reassembling and restaging here after their first partial defeat this morning, and they know that many of their colleagues are missing with the civilians in the wreckage. I've talked to several of them who were in one of the towers when the other one was collapsing, who barely got out. They're not quite sure how and can't even begin to talk about it. Tables have been set up in the street here by some of the officers who are helping them figure out who's going to go in when they can. There's a triage center that's been set up in the Manhattan Community College where bodies and people and survivors are going to be brought as they begin to figure out how badly they're injured. And we can tell, because they still can't go in, they're still milling around in the hot sun here, that it's going to take a long time before they can even begin to assess how many people there are who need their help in search and rescue, which is going to go on for some time. The streets just behind us are quite different. There's almost an eerie war scene type of feeling because much of this part of the West Village has emptied out. On this very clear, hot day, there are occasionally jet fighters circling overhead, so there's even just a touch of the feeling of covering a war. But for the most part, everybody is still looking at this enormous wreckage and just beginning to absorb what it is, and these firemen are eager and ready to get in there as they begin to gather themselves and dust themselves off from their first foray in this morning.
Bill, this is an excellent report. I just have this one question, and it may just simply be my own inability to grasp it visually. Are they actually getting into either of the former towers of the Trade Center, or are they still working on the outside perimeter?
I cannot tell you the exact answer to that. Many of them are still waiting on the outside of the perimeter to figure out how to get into the general area. When the North Tower collapsed, parts of the top of it fell over all the way over here to the river. And so they're still trying to sort out through the smoke just exactly where they can get into. They are not letting the media get anywhere near the actual base of the two towers themselves. But there's just a general sense of these accumulating hundreds of firemen, that they're ready to go in. They're waiting to find where an opening will be.
Okay, thanks very much, Bill Blakemore. ABC's Don Daler did manage to get, I think, pretty close to the building at one point earlier today. Don, are you there?
Yes, Peter, I'm here. I'm just back to about 4 blocks away, but I escorted a federal agent through the up to the side of the World Trade Center itself, and can tell you it is probably the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. There is total devastation, but beyond that, there's no non-gruesome way to describe this, but there are bodies and body parts on top of some buildings next to where the World Trade Center stood in the streets. There is still a number of fires going on in buildings surrounding it, including the Marriott building appears to be on fire. There's a building directly behind the federal office building. I can't identify which building it is, but it's a taller building. The police and the firemen are getting away from that area, but they're afraid that that building will collapse as well. There have been a couple building collapses or portions of them collapsing from the flames. So there are some buildings that they are just letting burn to collapse because it's too dangerous for them to fight it right now.
Don, thanks very much, Don. And now here is we're going to go to a briefing now on behalf of the political wing of the president's. I'm sorry.
Just have a very brief statement, and I want Chief Jester to talk about the search and rescue efforts underway. No surprise, we have very, very few details. We'll tell you what we can at this stage, but we have very few details. This is a terrible day. It is a tragic day for America. Our thoughts and prayers are with the injured and their families and the casualties. We're taking every appropriate step and precaution to prevent further attacks. We're making every effort to take care of the injured still in the building, and we're taking every appropriate measure to determine who is responsible. The Secretary of Defense...
And at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen, how long will the President stay in Nebraska?
Return to the White House?
Will he go back to Washington, Karen?
Will he address the nation? If the Vice President can stay in Washington, why can't the President be here?
Karen Hughes, the President. I must say, John Miller, that there's not an enormous amount of news in there if we've been following this event all day.
No, even the White House seems to be having difficulty gleaning the facts which officials in New York City just don't seem to know.
Yeah.
In terms of level of casualties, number of people killed.
And it's enormous. We're going to go to our White House correspondent, Claire Shipman, one of our White House correspondents, Claire Shipman, at the moment to see what's going on. But I'm very deeply sympathetic with the difficulty it is to get down to street level, either at the Pentagon or certainly in New York City, and understand the chaos and the tragedy that has appeared at ground level. Those of us sitting in newsrooms, bringing in, interpreting, analyzing information at a variety of levels are not doing a good enough job, because probably an impossible job to do, to try to have ourselves and you understand just what happened when that building fell in on each other. Listening to Bill Blakemore a short while ago and Don Daly, very helpful in terms of trying to understand it. But there is a delay in everything. There's a delay in government at the federal, state, and the national level. Airlines, of course, all across the country closed down. And it's true with news coverage as well, as best we can sense from here, that it's hard to get back from the immediate scene of this enough of a sort of texture to help us understand what enormous this is. Maybe you don't need it, maybe you already appreciate that, but that's our sense from here. But there's Karen Hughes making, the President has appeared, remember, twice. Claire Shipman ready? Claire?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can.
Much better you than me bring us up to date on what's happening in the presidential establishment, both there and elsewhere.
Well, let me tell you what we know so far. You obviously just heard a statement from Karen Hughes that seemed designed to try to express to the country that the government is still up and running. The political advisors, you've mentioned a couple of times, would very much like to see the president get back to Washington when it's safe so that he can address the country. But in the meantime, they certainly want to give the impression that everything is under control, that the vice president is at the White House, Condoleezza Rice is at the White House, the Federal Reserve is still operating, banks are open, HHS is mobilized, and I think that was the point she is trying to get across. We've been told that the president may be back as early as this evening. The AP was also reporting he's considering some sort of address to the nation this evening, but again, it may be that he will want to have something very specific to be able to tell the public before that happens. Colin Powell, we're told, is on his way back from Peru. It's not clear where he will head. At this moment, what has happened in terms of the Secret Service is that their plan has gone into effect for this sort of emergency. The first time, we're told, that a plan like this has been implemented in recent history, of course. But what it means is they have all of their protectees accounted for. They're satisfied with that now. Now we're told they're in level 2 where they're assessing the threat, and they will then decide things, for example, as to whether Colin Powell can go back and safely work at the State Department and whether the president can come back to Washington. In the meantime, as you probably know, there's been a state of emergency declared in the city of Washington and in the state of Virginia, allowing both of those places to be able to mobilize military and police forces as needed, Peter.
Thanks very much, Claire Shipman from Washington. It is very difficult to keep your hands on the political establishment today, in part because we rely on government so often in cases like this to tell us what is going on in their various departments, and it has been very difficult today to get, for example, the Federal Emergency Management Administration got involved in this today, but it's hard because of the communications problems all across the country to have a real appreciation of what they are participating. The most direct communication we've had has been with New York City on the ground, that is, other than in terms of the president's movements from Florida to Louisiana and now on to Nebraska, where he is going to stay for the indefinite future, though political staff keep saying he'd really like to come back to Washington.
There is something interesting in the laundry list of things that Karen Hughes, counselor to the president, said in the briefing we just looked at, which is, one is that airspace will remain shut down under government control until noon tomorrow, and that the movements of ships around the coast will be regulated by the government. That suggests, I mean, we're talking about not a few hours, we're talking about halfway into the next day. That suggests that there's a real feeling in the intelligence community and in Washington that this may not be over, that they don't want to let go of the assets like air traffic, that they think could unleash even more attacks.
I wonder, John, if there is a real feeling in the intelligence community that may not be over, or, God, we didn't know any of this was going on. Maybe there's something else there that we don't have the vaguest idea about.
Precisely. I mean, it seems to be an abundance of caution and some degree of fear.
Okay. Now, we're joined by ABC's Betsy Stark, who covers business and economics for us. You add to this extraordinary notion of how much the national life has been interrupted today by an act of, or two acts of terrorism anyway. Start first with what businesses were in the World Trade Center. We've talked to people before about the number of people in the Trade Center.
Yeah.
And what else has happened?
Peter, it's astounding how much the Twin Towers are part of the life of the financial district. 10% of all the office space in Lower Manhattan is accounted for in those Twin Towers. 155 businesses, 50,000 workers, as you've said before, including some of the major financial firms. Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, has 50 floors in Tower 1. 50 floors, I believe is right. 12.5% of the space in that tower occupied by Morgan Stanley. Several, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which manage bridges and tunnels, the airports, the harbor, a major tenant, 9% of the space there. Several major insurance firms, Empire Blue Cross, Marsh & McLennan, and among the banks, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, a couple of big trading firms, Credit Suisse, First Boston, and Oppenheimer Funds, which is a firm that manages several mutual funds. So lots of the big names on Wall Street were in those Twin Towers.
And in terms, the markets were closed today.
The markets were closed.
Stock markets.
Stock markets throughout the country. Trading was halted in some of the